Next up, we have Jack 10. I end up limping. Again, I think I would rather raise this kind of hand. I think limping is also obviously fine, but this kind of offsuit middle card hands benefit from raising. I limp call, and then, yeah, not much we can do post-flop. Just giving up. The hand just isn't a good blocking hand with these middling cards. More pocket nines action. We raise and take it. Ace 2 suited, we raise and take it. Queen Jack suited, we open. And we get 3-bet by the position to our direct left. Now, we cover slightly. We end up calling. We would be calling anyway, but happier when we cover. On the flop, facing a c-bet, we have to continue. We could make a case for sometimes raising the hand, but I think calling should be the default option. So I call, and we hit our bingo card. Now, facing another barrel, I think this hand wants to jam a fair amount. There are 2 flush draws here, and we don't interact with any of them. So this means our opponent is more likely to have these flush draws, but then also this means, we have more hands that we'll want to semi-bluff on the turn. So I jam, and we're up against ace king of diamonds. So yeah, I think very standard from our opponent, just an unfortunate cooler for him. Ace 9, we raise and then fold against the 3-bet. Queen 3 suited, we raise and take it. We cover both, so we definitely want to be opening wide here. And then we'll have ace jack offsuit. So we open under the gun, and we face a jam from under the gun 1. His bounty is about 5 starting bounties, which is around 4.5 big blinds, 4.5 big blinds. So we each call 13 for 25. And I think with the ICM, where now we're on like final 2 tables, I want to say. Let's have a quick look, actually, because I'm not sure if we're on final 2 or 3 tables. And we're on final 3 tables, yeah. So some ICM, therefore, I think ace jack just doesn't get to make it. It does a bit too badly against jamming range 2. He jumps all ace queen off, ace king off. Let's see, so we open around 17%, and he's supposed to jam something like this. So ace through kings, and then ace queen, ace king. Again, this range, we end up calling something like this. So yeah, you can see ace jack is not really a call. We'd rather call jack 10 suited because it just dominated less. We call pocket pairs, but not ace jack. Ace jack off just does too badly against this kind of range. Dominated way too much. Whereas jack 10 suited, yes, is doing worse against like queens and jacks and kings, but is doing way better against ace queen off, ace king off, and these are just way more combos. I ended up folding, and then we have ace king suited. Cutoff opens and small blind calls. We are definitely squeezing here. I went for this kind of small-ish sizing because I think cutoff will not be calling much anyway, so he will be jamming or folding, and the small blind range will be very wide and weak here. So us sizing too big doesn't make sense. Small blind calls, we range bet, he calls, and now we just want a showdown, but we face a very large sizing on the river. I think our hand should just be folding here. He hits this board fairly well. He can have a bunch of 10x, a bunch of sets. So yeah, I think we just have to fold here, as sad as it is. Maybe we could consider calling like ace king of diamonds, which doesn't block any of the backdoor flushers on the flop. King 7, we defend. On the flop, large sizing, I end up calling. Turn goes check check, and the river is fairly bad. However, against this half pot bet, in hindsight, I think I would rather call. Based on how our opponent has been playing, I don't think we will see that many ace-x here. Maybe something like ace 7, which we block fairly well. I think ace 9 always bets the turn, and I don't think he c-bets a lot of ace-x on the flop. Obviously, he will still have some value hands, but I do think against this player profile and this kind of sizings and action, we should be calling very wide here. I ended up folding. I don't hate it. My assumption could be wrong, but yeah, I think I would rather see myself calling here. King 10. We want to be calling a bunch against the button here, and offsuit broadways are really good calling hands. And we get this kind of 3 Broadway board. So the way this works is that when the small blind's range is very condensed around broadways, we develop a leading range on this kind of boards. The button will be opening super wide here, and we'll have a bunch of suited connectors and random like queen 4 off kind of hands, queen 7 off, and so on. Whereas we will have no low cards because we just don't really call pocket pairs. We don't have suited connectors much. We don't really call them in this spot either. So our range is mostly broadways. So this board is really, really good for us. So what happens is that we develop, as I said, a leading range for a small sizing. We want to be leading almost our entire range here, and King 10 definitely fits that category with middle pair and gutshot. Opponent folds. Ace 5 suited. We call against the short stack opener. On the flop, checking or betting, both fine options. I will be mixing here, and facing a check raise, we'll just have to fold. 8-9, we end up calling 4-way. I'm not too excited about this, but I think covering one player and also being up against the weaker player, this will make the call profitable. We hit top pair, and we face a stab from in position. Now, as we know, the first player in multi-wave, I keep saying as we know, maybe you missed some of my run fun session, maybe you don't know, but basically what happens is that usually the first player facing a bet in multi-wave pots doesn't get to have a raising range and just continues by calling everything. The reason this happens is that we want to protect our draws and our weaker calls with our strong calls. So 8-9, we continue by calling. Turn is a 10. We face a half pot bet, and we're not very excited here for sure. The 10 interacts well with his flop stabbing range, but we still have middle pair and open-ended, so we call. River pairs the 10, and we face a jam. This is a very close and ugly spot, because I think this will be an under-bluff spot. But then again, we are fairly high up on our range. We block some straights. We block some value, like 10-9 suited. And we're getting an insane odds. We are, basically facing a half-pot jam. So with all that in mind, I decided to go ahead and make the call. And we were up against 7-8 suited. I think this is a very bad jam from our opponent. Not only because the hand is just not strong enough to jam, but then it even blocks a lot of the calling range. If he blocks the 8 and the 7, then what am I going to call with here? So I think this is a bit too thin, but we take it. Queen 8 suited. We open big blind defense. Against this kind of wilder guy, I decided to check this back. I think in theory, we should be betting a lot, but I expect our opponent to be check raising a bit too much. So I think a hand with backdoor flush draw and 2 overcards that can't really call comfortably against the check raise, I would rather check back. On the turn, though, we start betting against king highs and denying equity from our opponent. 10-9 suited, we raise and take it. Ace 5 suited. We defend and we flop trips. Opponent checks back. And on the jack, I think we want to have a bunch of overbets with our trips and some of our draws. Ace 5 fits that category, so I do go for the overbet. And we get the fold. So now we are on final 2 tables. Ace 10, we open and we go 4-way, 3-way. Nothing to do for us here. We just check fold. Next, we have pocket 5s. We face an open from the button who covers both of us, so he should be very wide. We want to be calling a bunch here, and pocket 5s, I think, fits the calling range very, very well. We end up getting squeezed by the big blind. The big dog 09, yours truly, fellow Reddit One's coach. His bounty is worth how much is that? So 4 plus 2, 6 starting bounties. I'm so good at maths. 4 plus 2 equals 6. What do you know? So around 60k chips at this point, which is, about 4 big blinds. Around that. A bit less, I guess, but around that. So not very significant. However, pocket 5s seems like a decent hand to backjam with. So what should we do here is the question. My thoughts are that even though pocket 5s seems like a good hand to be jamming with here, this kind of non-only range will have a lot of overpairs in the value range. So pocket 5s just end up doing fairly bad against that. For example, we're not going to be up against like ace queen off here. So I think I would rather fold this kind of hand. And let's see what the solver wants to do. So button opening very wide, 58%. We call very wide. You can see a lot of pocket pairs, suited stuff, offsuit ace-x, offsuit broadways. Against that, the big blind is supposed to squeeze a range that looks like this. So we can indeed see that the non-all-in range is like tens plus, and then some ace-x suited, ace-queen suited, ace-king suited, and a few bluffs with these offsuit kind of ace-x. So pocket fives also end up blocking some of the bluffs. This is how our response should look like. So we can see that we'd rather jam with like ace-jack off and king-queen suited and king-jack suited. Pocket nines, of course, a bit stronger. But pocket pairs are just not doing well here. So king-jack suited, this kind of hands perform better because after we jam, we fold out all of these offsuit ace-x. And we're still doing okay against some of the calling range. Like we're flipping against tens and eights, and king-queen suited is flipping against jacks as well, and ace-jack. Well, kind of flipping against ace-jack, the fake flip. The one where king-queen always wins, I swear to God. Round over. So I ended up folding, and yeah, I think this is a very good fold. Against very aggressive opponents, though, who we might think are going full frequency with these offsuit ace-x, then we should be jamming relentlessly on them. I don't think Brooks is one of those players, though. I think he plays very well in that spot. Jack 7 suited, we open. We will be opening reasonably wide here. We cover small blind, are covered by the big blind. But our stack size is fairly large, so we will be opening a reasonably wide range. 10-9, we defend, and yeah, just check fold. Then we have ace-9 off. Facing this kind of open, we mostly want to be calling these kind of hands. Our non-all-in 3-bets would be very limited and would be more like ace-5 off than ace-9 off. We end up calling, and we go 4-way on 9-4 deuce. We face a half-pot c-bet from the opener, and our decision here is very interesting, so we definitely want to continue. The question is, do we want to raise or not? So in hindsight, I think a hand as vulnerable as ace-9 and as strong as ace-9 should be raising here. I wouldn't be raising sets, for example, but something like ace-9 or pocket tens, I think benefit a lot from raising and trying to claim the bounty. His bounty is fairly large as well. It is 6 starting bounties, which, as we said, is like 4 big blinds. So maybe fairly large is an overstatement, but it is not insignificant. End up calling a game, as said, in hindsight, I think I would rather just jam. We face a raise from the small blind, and now this spot gets even more complicated. So what should we be doing here? Now, my thoughts are that we are not doing very well against the bio range. So the small blind, I don't think, has much 9x that wants to be raising the flop. Most of his 9x will be suited, which means very, very few combos. And does something like 10-9 suited really raise here against the big sizing c-bet and the call? Probably not. So we're talking about very few combos of 9x, a bunch of strong draws, and then also sets. So I think in a spot where we are drawing dead against sets, we are kind of flipping against strong draws, like king, jack of hearts, or whatever it may be. And yeah, sometimes we're doing well against other 9x. We should not be jamming here. I think we call, and then we hope for a clean run out where we can realize our equity. Call turn is the flush completer, which, even though it's not a good turn card for our actual hand, I think it makes our life much, much easier. Because now we have a very easy fold if our opponent continues to put money in. And at the same time, I think we'll get to showdown fairly often against a bunch of the maybe king-9 suited, queen-9 suited that he may have. Turn goes check-check, so that's a relief. And river goes check-check as well. So at this point, I think we're going to be winning, but our hand is not strong enough to value bet, and we're up against king-9 suited. Yeah, I think the flop raise is good, and I think jamming on the flop with my hand that can improve and is drawing dead against sets is probably going to be a bit of an overplay when we are so close to the final two tables. King 7, against the limp, we want to mix between ISO and check back. We roll aggressively. Pocket kings, we 3-bet against the button. King Jack, we open and big blind defense, and I go for a 70%-ish c-bet. I think having some larger bets here is good, but I would rather go for half pot. I think 70% is a bit too large for the wide button range. King 8, we raise and take it. 9-8, we overcall, covering everyone. And on the turn, I go for this kind of large lead sizing. Now, the 9 isn't that good for the big blind. If we were up against, say, the cutoff, we should be checking almost everything here. But this position just doesn't have that much 9x. Only some suited ones, some of which just bet the flop. So I do think we get to have a lead here. And 9-8 seems like a decent hand to do that with. Jack 9 suited. We end up calling pre-flop. I think this is the default play on the flop. Bet or check, both fine options. And on the turn, just folding. King 8 suited. We open and we are heads up against the button. We should be a fairly high check frequency board, and King 8 with the flush draw seems like a very good checking hand. We call against the stub. Turn goes check check, and the river is the 4 completing the flush. So should we bet, and if so, how large? I think we should be betting here, yes. I don't expect to see too many bluffs that check back the turn. But at the same time, I also don't think we should be betting too big of a sizing. Our opponent will be somewhat capped when he bets more on the flop and checks back the turn. I don't think he has too much Jack X. And we block the 8, which would be some portion of his calling range. So I think it's the kind of hand we want to bet small with and potentially induce bluffs. But then also our opponent is going to be raising if he gets to remove some strong hand. Like if he somehow river like a set or a straight or slow played somehow on the turn, I think he will definitely be raising against our sizing. He ends up calling pocket 9s, and yeah, I think looks reasonably played from him. Although I would rather see a jump pre-flop with his stack size. Like we'll be opening very wide here, so I do think 9s just get to jump pre-flop. Then we have ace 5 offsuit. We are facing another the gun open, and I elected to 3-bet here. I think some of these offsuit ace-X perform very well as non-all-in 3-bets. Of course, we will have our value range, which will be like queens plus, some ace-king suited, and h5 off, I think, makes a lot of sense. Our opponent's bounty is fairly large. It is 9 starting bounties, which is like 3.5, 4 big blinds. So again, not super huge, but still somewhat significant. And we get the fold. So it turns out I was half right. So we are supposed to be 3-betting non-all-in with some offsuit ace-X, but not really ace-5 off. H5 is a bit too strong to be 3-bet folding. We'd rather use ace-deuce off and then some ace-6 off, ace-7 off. We also really like having low cards, as you can see, with 3-bet like king-deuce off, queen-deuce off, and that's because we want to be unblocking the raise fold from our opponent. So once we 3-bet, you can see under the gun is folding like 5s and ace-5 suited, so having a 5 blocks that. Having a deuce doesn't. You can see he doesn't open deuces or ace-deuce suited. So when we have ace-deuce, we have a good blocker for top range and a non-blocker for the folds that he's going to have. The EV between calling and 3-betting ace-5 is going to be super close, so I don't hate my play, but it's good to see that we just rather have a deuce and not care about the ace kicker too much. A king-deuce off is a better 3-bet than ace-5 off. 10-8, we open. So this wouldn't be an open in a regular situation, but being close to the final table bubble and covering everyone, we get to expand our opening range. So the default open would be 10-9 off. 10-8 off now, sure, let's go. Small sizing range bet. Ace 4 suited, raise and take it. Jack 10 suited, we defend against the open. And facing a small c-bet here, we get to raise a decent amount. A hand like Jack 10 bucks of flush draw looks like a reasonable check raising hand. So I raise, opponent calls, and turn is the ace. So the ace is a bit of a brick in the sense that our value range on the flop is king X, and the ace doesn't really change that. So we do get to keep on barreling a bunch on the ace. Does our hand want to barrel? I think the answer is no. Having diamonds blocks a lot of the immediate autofolds from our opponent. We want our opponent to have like Jack 9 of diamonds, Jack 10 of diamonds, like Queen Jack of diamonds, Queen 10 of diamonds, and so on. So I'd rather I'd rather keep on betting with a hand like 4-5 of diamonds than Jack 10 of diamonds. I end up checking and yeah, just not putting any more money in. Queen 10, we open, and the big blind defense. We want to be having some larger size and c-bets here, and Queen 10 seems to fit that category very well. We'd rather have a club, but even without, we've pulled out so much ace-x and king-x. Opponent call, and turn is a 5. So here, we want to keep on barreling mainly with the club, but I think we still get to bet without a club as well with this kind of non-equity hands. A hand like Jack 10, we would much rather check back with because we don't want to have to risk getting jammed on. Queen 10, though, can just bet fold very comfortably. So I think these hands get to barrel a lot. Opponent calls, and on the flush completer river, now we need a club to bluff. We will be betting a lot with Queen 10 with a club on the turn. So that hand, I would bluff with this hand. No. And we're up against 8-6 with a club, so good thing I didn't have a club on me. 5-6 suited, we call against an open. We will be calling very wide here, or not very, but reasonably wide. And on the flop, we want to stab a very high frequency. Our hand seems like a really good stabbing hand. 6-8 off, we defend. It is against the 10 big blind open, so we should be somewhat careful with what we call here, but his bounty, as we said, was worth a fair amount. It is 9 starting bounties, which is like 3 big blinds. So compared to the 10 big blind stack size he has, it's a decent amount. We flop an open-ended on a rainbow board, so against the c-bet, we just want to get it in here. We will fold out some like king 10 off we might have. Sadly, we're up against aces, not king 10 off, and we don't get there, but it is what it is. Then we have ace 9 offsuit. Here we're on like 11 players left, so close to final table bubble. And at this stack size, we want to be having some jams, and offsuit ace-x are our main jams here. Just to show you the small blind strategy, here we are. You can see offsuit ace-x, middling suited hands, low pocket pairs, and these 10-9 off, 9-9 off. 9-8 off are our main jamming hands. Ace-9, just a pure jam. Our opponent is supposed to call fairly wide, so ace-6 off, pocket fours, king-9 suited, king-jack off. His risk premium isn't too high here because it's a PSKO. Looking at the risk premium, it is only 5.7%. Whereas in a regular tournament, non-PSKO, it would be about double that. So we jam, and opponent has ace-8 off, so unlucky Brooks. Very standard call from him. Just a sad cooler. Well, sad for him anyway. I wouldn't be too sad. Pocket sevens, we go for an open. We cover both blinds. Flop, small sizing range bet. And now we just want to check it on the turn. And we hit the Bink River card. However, something really sad happens now. There is this bug on PokerStars where if you are typing and the action gets to you as you're about to hit enter to send the message somewhere, like Discord or social media or wherever, what happens is that we end up auto-min betting. Even though hotkeys are disabled, this is just some problem with the software. And here we have this thing exactly. Obviously, this is not the thing. I would never bet this sizing on the river. Our hand would just want to bet on the larger side. However, sadly, I ended up misclicking. Although maybe it worked for our favor, because I don't think Force would be calling a big sizing. So, you know, good bug after all. Jack 10, just folding against the 3-bet. This is a very interesting hand. Now, we have the button being basically auto-lean on the final table bubble. How should the cutoff play here? First, what we need to see is how large is the button's bounty. He has, how much that, like 6.5 starting bounties, which is worth about 65k or about 2 big blinds, 2.1 big blinds. So it's not worth much. We saw in the super short stack chapter that against super short stacks, we get to mostly limp. But this is a bit of a special case because on one hand, there's ICM, and in ICM, we don't want to have limps. On the other hand, even though it's an auto-lean short stack, his bounty is very insignificant. It's only 2 big blinds. So because of that, the cutoff actually doesn't get to have that many limps, being the cover and stack and all. The hijack would be having a lot of limps, but the cutoff no. So what the cutoff wants to be doing here is just have a larger open size because our odds aren't that good given how small the bounty is. In game, he went for a small sizing, and here we just call and go multi-way on the flop and just fold. However, let's see how this hand should be played. So first, hijack, we can see mostly limps. He's covered by almost everyone behind, so wants to play a very limp-heavy range. Cutoff, a few limps, but mostly raises. And we can see the 4x sizing is the only one being used. I allowed a 2.23x, which is the one he used in game. 4x, 6x, 8x, and all-in. And we can see the 4x is just the only one being used. So yeah, this allows him to just VPIP a wider kind of range because he gets to limp a bunch of hands. If he limped and then button jumped, as we know, we want to be playing a lot of over-limping behind and overcalling. So yeah, this is how we should continue with. This is one of the few exceptions to the no limping in ICM rules when there is the auto-lean stack. However, given that he had 6, 7 off and he went for a 2.3x, I think we can deduce that he's playing a raise-only range. So I gave him this 2.23x sizing and didn't allow limping for this solution. So he raises and button calls almost any two. And from the small blind, we want to play like this. So we want to be calling very, very wide against the sizing. And we also want to have some jams with suited broadways, ace queen off, ace king off, and some non-all-in raises. Our main bluffs appear to be some offsuit ace-6. So ace-8 off actually wants to go non-all-in sometimes. For sizings, I allowed 10 big blinds and 14 big blinds, and it looks like the 10 big blinds is the only sizing being used. Next, we have pocket sixes. We face a 12 big blind jump from the cutoff. As we said, his bounty isn't worth much. It's around 2 big blinds. So we definitely don't want to have many jumps here. Sixes seems like a hand that wants to be calling. And sadly, we lose to 10-9. Let's have a look here. So first off, 10-9 suited doesn't really want to jam. It can barely min raise. As we said in PKOs, we don't want to be jamming suited connected hands because our fold equity is greatly reduced. When he jumps, though, this is how the button gets to play. So as predicted, we don't play almost any jumps, and sixes is a fairly comfortable get it in. Now, if he jumps even wider, then sixes will become a better call. When we call, the small blind ends up playing like this, so jamming a fairly strong tight range. And yeah, same for the big blind. When the small blind jumps, we get to overcall jacks plus ace king. We even fold ace queen suited. Again, the reason for that is that the bounty is just not worth much. We ended up losing, but someone busted shortly after, so we are on the final table. We are one of the middling stacks. The biggest stack is 59 big blinds. There is a 50 big blind stack, and then it's us along with another 230, or I guess like 1, 2, 3, 4 stacks around 30 big blinds, and then some shorter stacks with one very short stack. As for bounties, the larger bounty is on us, which is 3.5k with a 250 starting bounty, so like 14 starting bounties. But there are a bunch of other big bounties as well, mainly Drews, Lose Control, and Z Las Vegas. And also Lean Decay 25. First hand, we have Queen 9 off, which is going to be a defend. We can defend fairly wide here, covering, and his bounty is also one of the bigger ones. Post-flop, we're just not really interested in putting more money in. On the turn, I think our decision is kind of close. Against this sizing, we should be calling some queen highs. Yeah, I think I don't mind mixing the sand between calling and folding. 8-9 off, we defend and check fold against the large sizing. Jack-10 suited, we defend. And our hand is just not very good at bluffing. We have middling cards. We don't want to have middling cards. We'd rather bluff with lower cards. So yeah, just not putting much money in with this. King-8 falls to us. And as we know, we want to have a bunch of raises here against the shorter stack, and King-8 off looks like a decent raising hand. It's not strong enough to jam, as we know, again, from the ICM chapter. We don't want to be jamming a lot against short stacks in PSQ or final tables because the risk premium is fairly low. So we raise and fold against the jam. Ace Queen facing an open and a call, we have a very clear jam. Not much else to do here. And we get lucky against Ace King suited. Very fortunate one to win. Ace-10, raise and take it. 3-5 suited, we defend. We will be defending fairly wide here. He has one of the bigger bounties, as we said. His bounty is worth 3.5k, so 14 starting bounties, which is around 150k, so 3 big blinds. You can already see, compared to the previous hand history review, that because the field is bigger here, the bounties are worth less. Like one of the top bounties is worth just 3 big blinds. This board is really good for the big blind. We will be calling a lot of these kind of middling connected stuff, whereas he will not be opening those. He won't even be opening suited 9x. So because of that, we actually get to have a bunch of leads here, and I think our hand makes a lot of sense to lead. We fold out a lot of better hands, high cards, and we also have the gut shot. Queen-6 suited, we open covering everyone. Again, we don't want to have many jams here. Pocket kings, raise and take it. Queen-Jack, we open, and the small blind defense. So the small blind has been a bit of a tighter face-up kind of player. We c-bet. This wouldn't be exactly a range bet, but I think our hand makes a lot of sense to c-bet with. And we face a check raise. I'm already a bit sad here because, as said, I think he's a bit on the tighter side, and I just don't see too many bluffs here. However, top pair, good kicker, backdoor flush or backdoor straight draw. What can you do? See a turn. Turn is an 8 and we face another bet. So this is very scary to me because the 8 is obviously better for our range. And then also now the Jack ends up being a bad kicker because we block some Jack-10, Jack-9 suited kind of hands. So I decided to go for a tight fold here, but I think against tighter opponents, this will end up being very good. Pocket 5s. We jam for 10 big blinds or 11. Seems very standard. 7-9. We defend again and just call 1 and check fold on a really bad turn. Then we have pocket 9s. We open and big blind calls. So ace-high board's really good for us. We will be opening a lot of ace-x, so I go for a half pot c-bet. In the normal final table, I wouldn't have too many larger sizings, but on a PSKO, risk premium is reduced, so we get to have more big sizings. Opponent calls, and turn is a very clear check-check. And river is fairly interesting. I think I should have gone for a value bet against some 8x, 6x kind of hands. I don't think there is much ace-x in our opponent range, but check the river. So yeah, in hindsight, I think I would rather see myself betting. I guess one of the risks of betting is that we can get check jammed on by hands like this, and yeah, that is very dangerous. Ace-8. We defend. It's not a happy spot because we're up against a very tight range, but he's short. We cover. Let's see a flop. And that is not the flop we continue on. King-Jack. We open and fold to a jam. Jack-3. We defend and just check fold. I will continue with the backdoor flush draw. Pocket tens, finally. We have an open and crystal clear jam for us. Then pocket jacks, we have an open again. Now we're four-handed and jacks just very clear jam, and we double up against pocket fives. I think fives has to call. He had fives, not me. I had jacks. So cutoff opening 26%, and the button gets to jam a range like this. So sevens through kings, ace queen off, ace king off. I think very interesting how tight we have to play. Ace jack actually is not a very profitable jam. It's very break even. Ace 9 suited, king 10 suited, king queen off, ace 10 off are just pure folds. And the reason is that we just don't really have much fold equity here. The cutoff is only open 26%, which is fairly tight. So yeah, we just don't get to jam that much. When we jam, cutoff calling fives plus, ace queen off, some suited broadways, yeah, seems reasonable. And fives, you can see, is actually fairly break even, but still a call. Then we have ace queen. We open, big blind defense, small size and range bet. Ace 5 off. So facing a very wide button open, even though there is some ICM pressure on us with the other very short stack, this kind of low offsuit ace-x, we really like jamming. As I said, the button will be opening a super wide range, so we actually have a lot of fold equity. Our bounty is 14 starting bounties, which is worth, let's see, so it would be 140k, like 160k or 170k, so like 2.5 big blinds. Therefore, we have just a lot of fold equity. The bounty isn't worth that much. King 10. We call against the button. We want to have a bunch of calls here covering. We don't want to be jamming a hand as weak as this. We go three-way on the flop, checks through. On the turn, we don't really want to be betting with a 10. And the big blind goes for a jam. So I think our decision here is very, very close. We won't be up against the 10 when he jams. So we're basically sort of bluff catching. We're kind of dead against the queen, but of course we're doing well against all the draws. So it just comes down to how many draws is our opponent jamming here. His bounty isn't worth that much. He has like 5 starting bounties, which is worth like 1 big blind. So the bounty doesn't add too much. I decided that he will be jamming enough draws for me to make the call. So I did and was up against Jack 9 off. Sadly, we lost, but thankfully my decision was correct, because if he jams Jack 9 off, he also has a lot of flusters. So calling the jam is the play. King 8 off. We face a 2-point-X open, and we get to defend this. We won't be defending super wide, but King 8 off is just a bit too strong of a hand. We flop 2 pair, amazing. We don't want to have too many raises here, and top and bottom is the kind of hand that we just want to be calling. Turn, we face a jam, and we have a very clear call here, and we're up against King Deuce. So I think the turn jam is a bit thin. I think him having some jams on the double flush draw straight row board is fine, but King Deuce, I think, is just a bit too weak of a hand. Maybe King 9, King Jack, I can see, but King Deuce, I think, just ends up crashing into better a bit too often. 9-8, we defend, call flop, and on the river we just go for a value bet. I think when the 10 pairs, we can go for a fairly large sizing with our second pair. He folded. I didn't show that, but he folded. And then we have the final hand. So let me play it out for you first. Button opens, we call. We want to have a bunch of calls here, but he will be opening a very wide range, and this kind of middling hands enjoy calling. Flop, we can raise or call, both options fine. Turn, we call, and river, we call, and lose to ace king. So first, funny that this is the exact same player we called with ace 10 high on the previous hand history in the 1K, and here we call with ace high again. This time we are not right. So let me share my thoughts. Up to the river, I think it's fairly reasonable. We can raise the flop sometimes. Turn, we mostly call, and then on the river, what we need to think about here is what is our opponent's value range? For the most part, it's going to be ace-king plus. So it's going to be ace-king, aces, I guess kings, king-queen, fives, maybe sixes if he range best the flop, but I guess he doesn't. So against this kind of range, what we need to look for is having unblockers to the bluffs. So what would the bluffs be here? Some 9-8, 9-7, Jack-9, Jack-10, maybe something like Jack-3 suited, Jack-4 suited. So we have a 7, but this 7 is actually not that bad because I think our opponent will not be bluffing with hearts on the river. It's obvious that my main folds on the river will be hearts, so he doesn't want to be blocking that. So even though, as I said, the 7 blocks some 7-8, 9-7, it won't be with a heart in them. Hopefully. The ace is a really, really good card to have because we are blocking ace-king and aces, and we're not blocking bluffs. So in terms of writing the hands, I think a king is pretty high. Something like ace-queen is amazing because we block a lot of value by blocking queens, king-queen, aces, ace-king, and we don't block any bluffs. But then something like queen-9, I think, is way lower on the list than our hand. Let's have a look at the solver. So on the flop, he's not supposed to range bet. He's supposed to mostly bet small and check back like sixes through jacks. One interesting thing is that he's also supposed to check back a lot with Jack-9, Jack-10, like 10-8, 9-7. A lot of these hands are supposed to be checking back. After he bets, we mostly want to call. Turn 6 of clubs. No, 6 of spades. We check, and yeah, his sizing is the one most commonly used. Again, he wants to be checking back some Jack-10, some 10-9, 9-8 pure, 9-7 pure, 8-7 almost pure. We call again, and river is the 5 of clubs. And yeah, so bottom value is going to be ace-king. Now, he's again supposed to check back Jack-10 and Jack-9. Against this range, we end up folding. We're even like folding some king-jack kind of hands. You can see that we'd rather call ace-queen and ace-6 and fold like king-jack, even like some king-9, king-10. Now, I think some adjustments should be made here. First, maybe our opponent is range betting the flop. Second, maybe our opponent is betting too much with 9-7, 9-8, 7-8 on the turn. Third, maybe our opponent isn't giving up with Jack-9, Jack-10 on the river. We saw that he does have a tendency of not giving up, like for example with the Queen-10 hand in the previous hand history review. So what I did to begin with, the only thing I changed is lock Jack-9, Jack-10, 10-9 to be 100% bluffs here. I didn't change his flop c-bets, I didn't change his turn barreling, I only added these bluffs on the river. And now we get to pure call these ace highs. We are again folding a queen, but we're calling these kind of ace highs that don't interact with the bluffs. So you can say that, okay, maybe he doesn't pure bluffs those. I agree, but I think a mix of all the previous things will happen. He will maybe c-bet a bit more, he will barrel a bit more with 9-7, 9-8 on the turn, which are natural river bluffs, and he will bluff a bit more on the river. So with all those combined, I do like my call. We ended up being against ace-king, so as long as he didn't show like king-8 as a value bet, I am happy. But yeah, unfortunately, third place finish for us, but I still think we saw a lot of interesting spots. I hope you enjoyed the review, and yep, that's it. We can wrap it up.